Fala galera, tudo bem? Estamos aqui em mais um episódio do nosso podcast Osteopatia Científica e hoje temos o prazer de estar aqui com o Leonardo Diniz e com o Pierre-Luc. O Leonardo vai apresentar esse cara sensacional. Espero que vocês aproveitem tanto quanto a gente vai aproveitar. E nós vamos fazer esse episódio. O Pierre-Luc é francês, ele fala francês, mas ele também é fluente em inglês. Então a gente vai fazer o episódio em inglês para ficar mais fácil de vocês colocarem as legendas aí, tá bom? Então, Léo, tudo bom com você? Conta pra gente quem que é esse cara que você trouxe aqui,
E
cara.
aí, e aí, meu amigo? Esse cara, Pierre-Luc Lermite, eu encontrei o Pierre no Instagram quando ele lançou um livro chamado Mitologias Osteopáticas, que a gente vai bater um papão sobre isso. O Pierre é um cara que trabalha muito pouco, é um cara muito à toa, sabe? Hoje ele é fellow no Centro Europeu de Ensino Superior de Osteopatia. Ele tem um doutorado, ele é formado em filosofia, é formado em osteopatia, ele tem um doutorado em direito e agora ele está fazendo um doutorado em filosofia, tá? Ele é especializado no campo de medicina, direito e filosofia. Já escreveu 5 livros sobre osteopatia, sobre direito, sobre a lei nas profissões da área da saúde e tem uma porrada de artigo publicado. Hoje ele é um cara que está trabalhando no Instituto de Pesquisa em Filosofia de Lyon e faz parte de um grupo da OIA, a Aliança Internacional da Osteopatia, uma força-tarefa para redefinir a identidade do osteopata. Vocês se lembram que a gente já estava discutindo há muito tempo identidade profissional, diagnóstico, e esse cara está aqui, lá no centro, trabalhando com isso. Salut Pierre, como allez-vous?
Oi, muito prazer.
E ele também fala português.
É, ele fala português, o cara
Mais ou
sabe.
menos.
Perfeito.
So, Pierre, do you want to say anything to our audience and to present yourself for us?
Maybe a few words to say that thank you for your kindness and for your invitation. I'm pretty sure that our exchange it will be very nice. Thank you.
All
C'est
right.
ça, ça. C'est ça, ça. Les curriculum, c'est ça, ça.
Si.
Uh, it's humble. That's it. Very humble. So it's a great person. We are going to talk about, start with our first uh, thing in podcast that is our nostalgic moment. So
Okay.
we want to know what do you think we have in the past that was good, that you like, a food, a play. What do you remember from your past? Where do you born? Where do you what do you remember? Nostalgic moment.
Yeah. When you asked me this question, I was just wondering about the childhood, and maybe what I miss the most could be something like the absence of necessity of focusing on something, because now that we grew a little, that we had lots of obligations, we had lots of things to think about, and during the childhood period, it was not at all the case. So maybe this is something that I miss the most, I would say.
No, live without any preoccupation.
Yeah,
No
something
worries.
like that.
Yeah, yeah. That's what we really did in the past, and now we cannot we are not able to do that anymore.
Maybe this is a lack of wisdom from our side, but maybe this is the case that we have to face.
Where was your childhood? Paris? Where do you born?
Yeah, I grew up in the west of France, in a little city. Maybe you didn't heard about. It's La Roche-sur-Yon. It's near far from the ocean, so it's a great place to grow, but to grow. Um, and then I studied in Toulouse after what we call the baccalaureate, some little kind of diploma before university. And I learned osteopathy in Toulouse, and then law school in Toulouse as well, and philosophical school in Toulouse also. Yeah, and now the laboratory where where I belong is in Lyon University, so mostly the est of France.
Nowadays you live in Lyon.
No, I still live in Toulouse, but I am, today you are in different kind of laboratory. You have to
Ah,
move lots of time so as to be in different kind of team of research.
Tava
So
lembrando
this
disso.
is quite something very, very usual.
Great, great, great. Do you have a bureau de consultation? Uh,
Cabinet?
An office?
a
Yeah.
cabinet?
Yeah, I still have an office. What would you say in consultorio? See? My office, yes, is in Toulouse, and I still have my office, a few patients every week. Yeah. Because for me, it's something that remains important so as to remain credible in the research field, because there are lots of criticism that are, I think, that are quite legitimate to think that researchers, if they live totally the osteopathic practice, they could lose a little bit of credibility.
I think that's very important. Always say that we must have researchers, but we must have clinicians.
Of
So
course.
we must have a, a link between both. If you don't have a link, we have a researcher that is studying, and it is going to be nowhere. And the clinic is going to have a lot of doubts. How does it work? How can I do with this patient? And we don't have answers for the clinic. So I think it's important. The researchers keep having the clinical part. That's amazing. For me, I don't think I have a I have just had a lot of teachers that was just researchers, and that makes really difference when we are in a class. So they don't have the real problem. They have theoretical problem. So that's very different.
Yeah, sometimes it's also hard to swim in those two different kind of currents and to establish a very um, pragmatical link. And some philosopher of science are seems to be agree with us, just like Paul Feyerabend. He wrote something like scientists, especially professional scientists, should remain a little bit in the practical field so as to yeah, put their research in the concrete world. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think.
because we have this huge variation between patients, and it's so hard to put on paper just on a theoretical basis, to put all the variations, patient variations on paper. You have to be on a daily practice to forge the real uh, the real identity of the profession, because when we see lots of patients, we start seeing the variations, the way the patients are going to evolve or devolve, and how the pathologists work between ages, the youngers, the olders, the male, female, and there has to be something like that to consolidate the knowledge, right?
Sure.
But let's talk about something that you wrote, and we know it's something that we suffer, and it's something that we are known for. That's the osteopathy. You just woke up one day and decided to write a book about mythology.
So, oh, in a poetic dimension, maybe we could say something like that. But actually, I am more on the reality part of the game. So it was something that I had in mind a couple of years ago. And I was just wondering before this book, I was writing mostly alone articles and books, and I thought it could be a great opportunity this time to make a direction of a collective work. And with my editor, we were thinking about a title a little bit in the provocating field, but that could start to increase the attention of the profession, of course. So we thought that Mythologies of Osteopathy was a great title. So this was a collective work direction. And I started my recruitment of the team. Of course, I decided to use osteopath, but osteopath that had also another diploma in a different kind of departments. So we had historian, we had engineers, we had um, a PhD in physiology. We had lots of different kind of skills bring together. So the main issue of this book was try to find a method that could make a link between scientists in the field of science of nature and humanities that have different kind of methodologies. So I use the theoretical background from um, um, a mythologue called Mircea Eliade that can enable us to treat every kind of myth in three different temporality. The first temporality is talk about the origin of the myth. The second part is try to have a discussion about the myth with the modern literature, for example. And the last part is about the function of the myth. So it's mainly a sociologically, anthropological, and political analysis. And that was the same method used in every chapter of the book. And of course, the direction was mine. So at the end, I wrote the introduction and I just focused on every chapter of the book so as to make sure everyone respected the method that I decided to use so as to give this hegemony of the book, of course. So we were very lucky because when it was published, at the very beginning, I was quite afraid of some reaction, of course, because it was kind of provocation in the title. It was something, but at the end of the day, we realized that it was very kindly accepted by the profession, and I did very much conferences on the topic, maybe a little bit more than 20, online and physical in schools, universities, associations, libraries. So we had lots of talk about this book. And now we are trying to think about a possible traduction. So if you guys are interested in the translation in Portuguese, you will be very welcome, of course,
That's ours. No problem. That's
because it
ours.
enables us to talk about osteopathic identity and very sensitive issues that we can find in the profession more than other profession, more institutionalized. So it's quite sensitive question that we maybe need to talk about nowadays if we want to improve the profession.
It's
And
the elephant in the room.
just one thing. Para quem está assistindo esse podcast, aqui no link dos comentários vai ter para você comprar o livro original do Pierre. A gente vai colocar o link aqui nos comentários. Quem quiser comprar o livro. E se vocês quiserem um livro autografado, vocês vão ter que aguardar que a gente vai levar o Pierre para o Brasil e ele vai poder autografar o livro de vocês, tá bom?
E o livro,
An autograph should be 100 euros more just for the book with an autograph.
Sorry?
With
100 euros for per autograph.
Of course.
That's okay for you? 100 euros for an autograph? That's okay?
Sure.
Só um recado. O livro do Pierre, ele tem a versão física e tem a versão digital também, para quem se interessar. We read the book. We loved it. We know it's something that's the elephant in the room
Yeah.
because we have the deniers. There are lots of us that just deny the existence of the myths. But we want to know, what are the myths? What are osteopathic myths? Explain us.
Okay. Actually, I could not make an exhaustive enumeration of the myth. And the good, I think, maybe we'd like to, maybe it's something it could be possible to say that there are lots of myths, and we just picked up 7 of them because we had to make a book. So now, with the success of the first book, I decided to make a second one on the same field with
Make a
other
movie.
researchers, so mostly osteopath with a special other skills. And we started to work on that. So there will be a Canadian osteopath, Belgium osteopath, in Switzerland also, and we are working on the second book on methodology osteopathic too. So I guess there are maybe more than 14 of them at least, but maybe there are a little bit more myth. The most difficult part, so as to identify what a myth is to try to clarify its status. So you have to prove that the myth exists. So you have to find literature that show this myth is not only your opinion about the existence of the myth, but there are tangible evidences that show the myth exists as in its own existence positively. And then this is the possibility to talk about his reality or his factual existence, and then to make this political analysis. So there are lots of criteria that we need to regroup together before treat the myth. So I'm not sure that I could today give you every myth that can exist in medicine or in osteopathy. What
Mhm.
I can do is to talk about myth that we identify only in this first book, if you want, of course.
I
Yeah, yeah.
talk about one myth that
Yep.
the myth of purity.
Yeah.
The steel phrase that I love most is tell the boys to keep it pure. Can you elaborate a little bit about that?
Sure. Oh, it will be maybe the easiest part of our conversation because you refer to the chapter that I wrote myself. So thank you for this. It will be even easier for me. So most of osteopaths listen to different kind of quotes, maxims, stories about their profession, and sometimes what is very interesting is that they do not know exactly what the real history is because they do not read the history. And we have different kind of evidence today, such as the book of Norman Gevitz, an historian who wrote this history of osteopathy in America. We have lots of testimony from the emergence of osteopathy that are not always easy to find, but if you do your own research, you can find them and try to figure out what was clearly happening during the emergence of this profession. And one of the quotes, yeah, as you just mentioned it with this rectus, but it's clearly obvious because it's keep it pure, boys, tell the boy to keep it pure. Um, it's connected with Andrew Taylor Still, and the story that I've been told was that Still was expressing this phrase while he was dying so as to take the profession together to protect the profession from other profession that would maybe like to get osteopathies, just medical doctors, chiropractor, because Daniel David Palmer made chiropractic in 1895, so not just few years after the creation of American Osteopathic School in 1892. So there was lots of identity struggles at the time. The thing is, when we are looking for evidence of the existence of this sentence, it's not very easy to find, and the only evidence that I had was an evidence from the Museum of Kirksville, gave by Jason Axton. Yeah, sure, this one. And he kindly authorized us to publish the photography of the evidence that we had only 100 years after, just like the anniversary of the creation of osteopathy. And it was written on a little thing on the wood that this was a sentence from Steele 4 months before he died, and it's only evidence. So historically, it's a very weak evidence because it's more something that is trying to celebrate the existence of osteopathy than a factual historic evidence of this. And then, of course, there is the philosophical question about what is something pure? Can it even exist, or is it even impossible to think about something that can remain pure through the ages?
And there's a thing that you mentioned that reminds me that we don't have enough classes about history of osteopathy.
Sure.
Especially here in Brazil, that we made our formation here, we don't have enough classes of about history, about who was Andrew Taylor Steele, how was the war at that time. How important do you think it's knowing this place in history? Where was the war at this time? We don't have bloody exams, we don't have X-rays, and we are doing. How important is for you the history of osteopathy?
Of course, as a philosopher specialized in epistemology, I would say that history is a main important thing, but we could also find that lack of teaching in medical education as well. They only have few hours about medical history in during the first year, and then they just forget it. Most of the time, this is the case when students are texting to their friends or maybe sleep after a party that they had last night. And it's not a very successful course in medicine. But in osteopathy, maybe it's more important because the identity of the profession is not stabilized. So it maybe represents biggest thing in the education for osteopath, and also because it can explain why did we think something at the beginning and now we change our point of view because of new evidence that we didn't had at the end on the 19th century or during the 20th century. And for medical doctor, maybe this is not as big a big problem as we have, because maybe they do not care about this history because their identity is more stabilized. If you ask someone in the street what is a medical doctor, it's very easy to have an image as a sociological analysis. But when you ask what an osteopath is, I guess in Brazil, I'm not sure that everyone know what an osteopath is. Is it a doctor specialized in the bone or something else? Not sure that it's as clear as we have in different kind of European countries. For example, in France, it's more stabilized what an osteopath is because we have inquiries that can enable us to say that. But I'm not sure that is the case in most countries in the world.
I think the problem we have in Brazil is that we have two ways to be an osteopath here. We have the
Yeah.
physical therapy that studies osteopathy and the osteopath. So I think the first problem is we don't have identity of the profession. So we some patients, the population in general thinks, oh, that's physical therapy. No, that's osteopathy. That's another thing. So I am physical therapist and I am osteopath. So I have this problem explaining for my patients what I'm going to work with them. So I no, this is physical therapy. This is osteopathy. How can we stop one and start another? And don't, so that's the first problem I think we have here in Brazil. The identity that's the first.
As
Oh,
as we were discussing yesterday, we have this thin line between the professions, and uh, the teaching of physical therapy in Brazil is it's so tainted with the manual therapy because me and Leo, we have 25 years of physical therapy formation, and we learned the true physical therapy, uh, therapeutic exercises, and how to manage the various machines, TENS, ultrasound, and stuff. And we had this little this small part of the college was dedicated to manual therapy, like massage and stuff, stretching. And after we had this formation in various manual therapies. And today, the students in Brazil, they have this huge part of the formation dedicated to manual therapy, and just mixing with different things. And now in Brazil, we have a huge amount of professionals that see osteopathy as just a technique, just a bunch of techniques at the disposal to use, but they are physical therapists and not osteopaths. They say, "Oh, come to my office, and I will do some osteopathy in you."
And
I'll
that's
do
that's
osteopathy. How so?
the
How
crack
come?
parts. Crack,
And they
crack,
mean
crack.
just,
That's okay.
yeah, they mean just to perform high velocity manipulations most of the time. And you were talking about the myth of purity, and the myth of purity is linked to the myth of the foundation principles, right? And how do you believe how far do you believe it goes, the myth of the foundation principles, in stopping the evolution of the profession?
So the thing is, Andrew Taylor Still himself wrote 4 books. We could add one more if we think about the second rewriting of his autobiography at the beginning of the 20th century, and some articles in the Journal of American Osteopathic Association at the time, that had a mutation of the name in 2019 called now the Journal of Osteopathic Medicine. When you read that Andrew Taylor Still literature, you cannot very easily identify osteopathic principles. You can identify main ideas that come sometimes a little bit more than others. That's what I did in my first book. I identify 6, 7 very frequent ideas which he refers in his book, but he didn't wrote something like osteopathic principle are on the list. So after there was a kind of struggle with the notion of professional identity again, with the what are the basic principles of the profession. So as to summarize the profession, we have to have something in common and share values around different kind of ideas, and they were not really existing very clearly in his book. So osteopathy needed international conferences, and there were different kind of conferences and consensus during the 20th century. In 1922, 1953, and 2002 at the beginning of the 21st century. And those principles moved through the ages. At the beginning, it was very centered on the body. And then a little bit, they moved to be centered on the person. And that's a big paradigmatical difference, I could say. And then, of course, in 2011, in the International Journal of Osteopathic Medicine, there was this very nice call of abstract from Gary Fryer about the identity profession of the principles. What could we think about that today? And few articles were published on the specific part of osteopathic heart, I say. And 10 years after this call of abstract from Gary Fryer was another call of abstract from Stephen Vogel, who asked a call of abstract for a special issue, again in the International Journal of Osteopathic Medicine. And this very special issue was published in 2024, where you can find different kind of articles 1 year after the publication of our colleague Oliver Thompson and Andrew Macmillan, What's Wrong with Osteopathy? I'm sure you heard about this article, and you read it, of course. And this 1 year after, there was this article that I published in the double facet of osteopathy's identity at the same time of Pseudoscience, a Skeleton in Osteopathy's Closet from our colleague Hidalgo, Thompson, and Macmillan, and the fallacy argument of anatomical possibilism. So as you can see, but I'm sure you're very aware of that. But for your people that are listening to you, maybe we had to just focus on this part, is that the principle evolved through the ages. So we cannot say the profession is still the same. So the maybe item identity that I put in my article is the history link between the creation of osteopathy and its history and its evolution from the beginning to nowadays. So the evolution of those principles are just questioning now, do we even need very specific osteopathic principle? This is a question that I'm not able to answer alone. Of course, this is a collective work that we have to do. And or are they just a part of osteopathic identity that can enable to make a definition, or do we need to leave those stuff alone and very far from the osteopathic concept or not? Those are common discussions that maybe we need to have in the profession so as to establish the clearest identity of our profession.
And
Yeah.
we have another myth that is really I saw some day a meme that is welcome to cranial osteopathy, where uh, the physics doesn't matter.
Fun fact.
Yeah, that was something like that. So the mobility of the cranial bones,
Yeah.
how it's a very hard topic for us.
Yeah.
Some say no, we cannot do some intervention in the mobility of the cranial bone. That's impossible. That's a little short more movement, so it's impossible. How what insight does your book provide to this special subject that is
Okay.
a really myth for us?
Okay. So as to talk about this kind of very specific aspect of osteopathic practice in the world, history is very helpful, I guess, because at the beginning it was not quite a so strange idea to think that there was a kind of rhythm that manual therapists could be able to identify with their hand. It was not quite strange. But then, of course, when you have an idea, a crazy idea, like William Garner Sutherland wrote in his own book in 1939, he called that a crazy idea himself. So we need to,
Was
yeah,
the with thinking fingers the book of
yeah, the cranial ball with
the
thinking
cranial
figures
bone?
is the biography of Sutherland from his wife Ada Sutherland.
Okay, but I saw another one that was with thinking fingers. It's the Sutherland too.
Okay. Maybe, yeah, I have both the titles in English and in French in my head, and they are quite
Okay.
confusing because his wife, Ada Sutherland, wrote a book about the biography of her husband called uh, With Thinking Fingers. I guess this is this kind of title, the biography of William Garner Sutherland himself. So it's very useful because she's writing lots of different kind of details that Sutherland wrote himself about his crazy idea that no one wanted to hear about. He tried to print his book because before becoming an osteopath, he was a journalist in another state in Minnesota, I guess. And he heard about osteopathy, so he learned osteopathy, and he had this crazy idea, beveled like the gills of a fish. It's written in the museum, of course, and it was just an idea. Why not? Why not? This is because we have idea that you can elaborate hypotheses and try to test them so as to see if there is a kind of scientificity that can emerge. So it's not strange at the beginning. But when he tried to do some tests, he did not do lots of tests. He did tests on himself that were not very nice tests because at this time in medicine we had lots of different kind of methodologies that we have different kind of hypotheses. Or he didn't knew anything about scientific method. That's why this is not a scientific claim. So maybe it could be a claim, but not a scientific reality, or he knew about the method and he decided not to use them. And this is a kind of non-epistemic value for William Gardner Sutherland. And then there were lots of tests did some by Louisa Burns at the beginning of the 20th century about the skull of the rabbits, and then with Viola Freeman, and the results were not extremely good. They could identify a very specific rhythm that was not the heart rhythm, that was something else, that the respiratory system. But then they could identify that it was a very specific thing that we called uh, Traube-Herring-Mayer. Yeah, and it was the same rhythm from this thing. So when you took back this kind of evidence that you focused on the fundamental research, you can see that, of course, the bones are together, so there's no possibility of the mobility, of course, and the pressure in the brain is not enough so as to make a kind of deformation of the skull. It's not possible. And a French colleague that I think you podcasted a few months ago, Raphaël Zegara-Parodi, made a study so as to measure the pressure on the brain, on the skull that osteopaths do, and it was something like 50 grams per centimeter. So it was not really enough to touch even the bones of the skull. So all of this is not possible in the physical world, of course. And one other thing that we have to mention, so as to be exhaustive on this part, is that the person who defended very hardly this notion of MRP, CRI, or other things were very connected to religion. When you look at Viola Freeman's book, it's clearly written in the book that she is quoting a lot Bible, some books from I promise you this is not a joke, Ave Maria Press, definitely, and the New Testament, and there is an old chapter about the power of Holy Spirit on the earth. And at the beginning of this book, she mentioned exactly precisely that she made a mix between religion and medicine. So this is not something that is hidden under a rock or something. This is clearly written if we just have a few moments to read it. And in Harold Eve Magun book, at the very beginning of the book, it's written that you have to admit the existence of God if you want to do osteopathy with the skull. So this is not a mystery. This is not a mystery. And when you look at the evidence and the history, the epistemological history from this cranial thing, you can easily identify the points that could be a little bit problematic if you talk about Osteopatia Científica, for example.
Really, that's hard. And you mentioned something that is really interesting because we have two ways to investigate cranial osteopathy. There are some researchers that starts with the biomechanical model. So the temporal bone moves 40 micra, and that's it. And there are, I think you know him, Francesco Serritelli, that
Of course.
investigate the vascularization model. So I think we are starting to know that we have more effects when we go to the vascular model than the biomechanical model. How do you see that?
Okay. I'm not sure that I could draw this dichotomic line that you mentioned. I would say that we have now different kind of method that can enable us to realize that what we do with our hands has value. And we can't, of course, touch the skull and the rest of the body. And when we do that, we have functional MRIs that show something is really happening in the brain. We also have biomarkers that show it's decreasing inflammatory markers such as TNF-alpha or every different kind of other things that we have in common with other manual therapy. So we are now focusing about what is happening when someone is touching someone else and try to focus his attention or put his attention away. And we see that it's really different, the reaction in the brain with the vascularization and so. So it means that osteopaths do not have to stop touching people, of course. They have to do that, but they have to use some evidence that we have that show it has value for good reason that we could identify with a common scientific method instead of mobilizing spiritual ideology or even things that we proved that they were not, I would say, that they are unplausible or unrealistic.
Yes. Yes. In summary, today to work with cranial osteopathy is just a leap of faith because you have to put the hands on the cranial and believe that something's going to happen. And the work of Francesco on vascular variation, the modification of the blood flow on the brain after the manipulation and mobilization, it's really promising, but we have to wait to see what's coming next, right? And I want to ask you something, and then we could talk about the osteopathic lesion or suction. And why do you believe we still remain teaching cranial osteopathy the way we do, as we see on the Sutherland College in England, in UK, and the Cranial Academy and the OPC and the Sutherland College and in the US? Why do you believe they're still teaching that the way they used to back in the 20th century after Sutherland and stuff? I was in the US participating in the cranial course given by the Cranial Academy. It's exactly the same we had on the formation. It's just the Magoon book all over, and it's just the same. Why we keep teaching that?
I can give you my personal opinion, but it won't be my scientific opinion because I do not have enough evidences uh, to make my hypothesis valid. So I can only give you my opinion on that part. What I think is that there may be different kind of explanations. Maybe some of them, and I know that they are existing, do not know that we have evidences that can put those ideology in an unplausible explanation status. Other, maybe they are quite aware of these evidences, but they do not care about the evidences because they prefer remain in their spiritual way. I also saw that. Another explanation maybe is more sociological explanation with identity, is that osteopaths need sometimes to make the difference between what they do and other professions, and they have to focus about things they only have together in common, but they do not have in other professions. It cannot be medical knowledge because medical doctor also have that kind of knowledge, and other health professional also, just such as physiotherapists, have that in common also. So you have, when you create something, to identify what we call identity markers. We call that in philosophy of language signifiers. So you had lots of things such as cranial osteopathy, somatic dysfunction, and then osteopathic dysfunction, philosophy of osteopathy, so as to make a community that can share value and have very specific identity that can make a comparison and boundaries between this profession and other profession. And I think sometimes this is a kind of a shield to protect against invader that could try to appropriate themselves this profession. And when it's the fight of your life, I'm quite sure that you're not going to to surrender so easily. So maybe sometimes you remain in a way that is maybe sometimes comfortable, sometimes uncomfortable, but it's easier for your cognition to go to this direction instead of change everything and try maybe to lose your own identity.
Right, that makes sense. That's the one thing that defines us as a separate profession, and it's something that we can say, oh, you have to be an osteopath to do so. It's something that the palpate a cranial and work on a cranial. It's something that only an osteopath can do, nobody else. It's
And
like
then it
that.
enables you to draw a line between people that are has special abilities and the other. And if you do not agree, maybe you're you do not how would I put that? You're not good enough to be in the community. So it's here
Yeah,
to to put someone away of the community.
you're not part of the gang.
You're not a part of the gang, exactly. This is maybe what I think. Yeah.
Deve,
We have a word from our sponsor now, just a sec. Vamos
deve
falar do
ser.
nosso patrocinador, Léo?
Bora, bora. Vamos falar do nosso patrocinador. Todo podcast tem um patrocinador principal. E o nosso podcast não é diferente. Então, o nosso patrocinador principal. Então, se você quiser ter acesso a mais aulas, a todos os episódios do podcast, o Congresso de Osteopatia Científica, que já está gravado lá, descontos especiais dos nossos cursos presenciais. Então, se você quiser ter acesso a tudo isso, você vai fazer o seguinte: você vai entrar na comunidade Osteopatia Científica, que é um grupo de profissionais que foi idealizado pelos Leonardos que estão aqui para trazer um ambiente para você, osteopata, para você, estudante, para conseguir evoluir dentro da profissão, sem esquecer, lembrando sempre da história, lembrando sempre dos nossos princípios, lembrando do nosso passado, trabalhando no nosso presente, construindo o nosso futuro, todos juntos, em prol da nossa profissão, do que a gente faz todos os dias, como a gente coloca comida na nossa mesa e como a gente ama trabalhar, por isso que a gente está aqui fazendo tudo isso. Certo, Léo? Então o link está aqui
É isso
embaixo
aí.
da comunidade Osteopatia Científica.
Clica no link aí e lembra-se, gente como o Pierre aqui que a gente traz para discutir ciência, pessoas de fora, de outra realidade, que estão discutindo num outro nível, um nível que enriquece e aprimora a profissão. A gente aguarda vocês lá na nossa comunidade. Olha, ó,
Ah,
vamos
Pierre,
seguir.
Pierre, there is a researcher that in the University of Vancouver that say that we have a palpatory pareidolia when we are doing our you are we are just talking about the touching the cranial and how do you see that how our skills our palpation skills and practice when we have some critical heavy critical like this.
Okay, so there are, of course, some confirmation bias. There is also this possibility to make an analogy between pareidolia. I know the word in French, but I never use it in English, so it's difficult for me.
Pareidolia, I think.
Pareidolia, something like that. But there is also, this ideomotor effect that we have when we make a palpation, that we could maybe be very sure that it's in reality what we do with our hands, but most of the time it's built or rebuilt by the brain, and it's not enable us to be very sure of what we do with our hands. This is a very old dilemma that we have in the history of philosophy, with the sense that we cannot trust, of course, since Platon, Descartes, and lots of other philosophers. And it doesn't mean that we have to stop to touch people again, because we mentioned that there are lots of evidence that show it can enable to increase the health of people in a very restricted area. But there are evidence that show this is possible, between other things, such as biopsychosocial aspects of the care in medicine. Um, I don't know. This is a very big discussion because we do not have to make a confusion between palpation and perception. There are two different kind of things, different kind of area. Palpation is in the world that we can make measure with dynamometer and something else that can enable us to see that the skulls cannot move for lots of development, ossification development reasons. And there is also the world of perception that is more a phenomenological thing. And there are a few articles about that by Amanda Benton and Stephen Vogel that have been reviewing for the International Journal of Osteopathy. So there are few elements that show the perception is something quite precious that we can share with patient that we call intersubjectivity, so as to make sense of what we do with our hands. And maybe we need to focus maybe a little bit more on this field on the next year, researchers in the field of philosophy, psychology, for the practice.
I just asked that because I research palpation skills. So that's really, really important for me.
I believe that the pareidolia it's related with something that we were discussing about the skull and the osteopathic lesion. It's also one thing that connect us as a group, as a profession, as the gang gathered. And let's talk about the myth of the osteopathic lesion and also the myth that we can perform things that goes beyond the musculoskeletal frame and as visceral osteopathy and the circulatory effects and stuff like that. Uh, how do you see us today working with that? How why that myth is so popular and as the displaced vertebrae, and how can we run away from this myth? How can we work to leave this myth behind and be more actual, more present with the science and the evidence?
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, the thing is, the vertebra misplaced is very popular because it's easy to understand for everyone. You don't need to have very good literacy in the field of health so as to understand there is something wrong, something out that we need to put in the correct place or something else. But osteopaths are not the only practitioners that are facing this kind of cognitive reduction. There are also that in chiropractic they do not talk about dysfunction, they talk about subluxation, but it's exactly the same thing. We also have a profession in France, I'm not sure that is very famous in the world, that we call ethiopath, that come from a special branch of osteopathy that are just reasoning exactly the same with the lesion. At the very beginning, it was not a mistake again to think about that because um, there were few researches in Kirksville did by Irvin Corr and Dr. Denslow at the time. And when they published a little paper during the 50s and after the 50s, it was quite convincing. They identify very scientifical, clear things that could bring new evidence in the medical knowledge in general about what is happening in the reflex of the contraction of the paravertebral muscles when there was a stimulation. So it was not a strange idea. But then there was also this very nice guy, Gary Fryer, that did lots of research at the end of the 90s and the beginning of the 21st century. And at the end, 2004, 2006, 2010, he published lots of papers that showed when you do the same experiences that Irvin Corr and Dr. Denslow did, you cannot find a statistical difference between the two groups when you analyze this. So it could be very deceptive, of course, because it could have been a great period for osteopaths because they had evidence, very strong scientific evidence that showed what they do had sense. So it could be great for osteopaths of this period to see evidences. But then, of course, other evidence did not enable the osteopathic theory to remain correct. So now this is the big problem because lots of osteopaths were very focused on the body. And when you focus on the body, it has lots of sense so as to see that kind of problems. But if you make a paradigmatical shift and move to the person, not the body, maybe this is not as a big problem as you thought initially. So it leads us to another chapter of the book about holism, I guess. It could be a nice connection, I think, because lots of osteopaths are very sometimes proud to say that osteopathy is something global, and it's not strange, of course, to say that kind of things when you have the medicalization of the body in different parts for the medical specialties, of course. And people sometimes lose some sense when they are visiting their medical doctor. So they can refine some new sense when they see their physiotherapist or their osteopath or their chiropractor, for example. So if you admit that the globality is not the globality of a body, but the globality of a human person is a very complex field of biopsychosocial, you don't need you need to admit the idea that the globalism of the person is more global than the globality of the body. That's not an easy task, but when you try to realize that, it's easier to see that the biopsychosocial model can improve the care of the person. And when you are an osteopath, and being global is not an awful word, of course, it's very nice, but you have to focus on the definitions so as to make clear what globality means, of course.
And how does all of that work when you have a traditional osteopathic consultation?
What is the holistic approach?
How do you,
What does that mean?
yeah, how do you do that with a person, your patient? How do you see that in the patient?
You mean in a clinical situation, for example? When you look at the clinical situation, taking care about the biopsychosocial model implies that when you're doing your the first part of the consultation, when you receive your patient, you ask him if you're focusing on the consent process, of course, and you're doing a special you're using a special modality to ask questions so as to identify the value of the patient, his beliefs, so as to understand not only what he says, but what his representation of his problem is, so as to clearly identify the social issues that he is facing, the biological things that he is facing, and the psychological thing that he is facing. And I would say that in the pejorative occurrence of the term consultation, do not care about the value of the patient because they impose their own way to see the patient based on somatic dysfunction, based on cranial osteopathy, or even without any communication because only tissues know and you need to touch the body and the body is going to reveal the problems that they have. So the biopsychosocial model does not enable you to touch the person and try to figure out where are the different kind of problems that the patient have in his body, but can also enable you to see the problem for the person in all dimensions of his life. So it's a really different modality to imagine the appointments that you have with your patients. And when you look at that, you do not see that it needs lots of knowledge and skills. But when you try to to make different kind of sequences with the appointments, you can realize that you need lots of skills so as to be able to do that properly, because you need medical skill, psychological skills, sociological skill, epistemological skills, lots of tools, communication skills. And that was not the case of the traditional osteopath, I would say, again, with the pejorative consideration of this qualification.
That's hard. That's the hard part.
Yeah, yeah. Meaning, it's not that thing that find it, treat it, leave it. It's much more
Yeah,
than that.
of course. But again, at the end of the 19th century, when Charles E. Steele wrote that in his book that you can buy in the Kirksville library, of course, um, it had a little kind of sense because it was based on the body conception. So it was senseful, I would say. But nowadays, we have a different kind of knowledge in the medical literature that could invite us to reconsider the literature that there was present in the 19th century without any, I would say, disconsideration for the guys that wrote that kind of things at the time, because they didn't knew about new evidence, because they were dead before this new evidence could be published in the medical journals. So no problem with history.
Yeah, yeah. Let's talk about the diagnostic ability of an osteopath. How do you see our work as diagnosticians, as health professionals that have to build a diagnosis to be able to plan a treatment and to go with that treatment and give prognosis to patients? Where do you see the methodology interfering with the ability to build a diagnosis, and how can we uh, clear clean our practice from that, and the subject of diagnostic skills?
I didn't write anything about diagnosis, so I can talk about only what I know, because I wrote a book in 2022 called Medical Evidences, so I can talk about medical diagnosis. And we have lots of evidence that show medical doctors make lots of errors when they are diagnosing pathology. So it would not be strange to say that osteopaths could also make errors when they make diagnoses. So maybe the main point would be to identify the red flags with a very strong medical knowledge, so as to identify difficult parts of the treatment that could invite osteopath to call emergencies for the patient, so as to address the patient to a proper professional that is going to treat him with the best tools that we have. And then if there is no red or orange flag, there are different kind of problems, but they are not dangerous as the red flag. So um, the chronicization factors could play a part in this conversation, because if osteopaths are explaining to their patient, for example, that the vertebra is not in the correct place and they have to put it in the same place, um, it could be a factor of chronicization, because the patient are going to think that if they are hurting themselves, it means that something is out of his place and they need to go to see the osteopath, so that the osteopath could put the vertebra in the correct place, instead of understand that this is not how the body works, and maybe they do not need each time to go to see an osteopath. So it can improve something like public health when you improve the comprehension that your patient has about his own problems. So maybe I would just have a quick focus on that part. And then for the ability of diagnosis, of course, osteopath practitioners are more touching their patient than medical doctors. So maybe they are maybe able to identify things that medical doctors do not do. So maybe they have a special place, special role to play in the public health, as far as identify things that maybe other professionals do not have enough time to identify, for example.
And
Right.
after busting all those myths, where do you see osteopathy is heading? Where are we going now with all these myths just busted?
What's left for us?
I
We
don't
have
know. I don't know. So this is the crystal ball question. What is going to happen in the future? This is not scientists could make predictions, but on that field, I would say this is more a political thing than a scientific thing. So I don't know. I could give you my own opinion, but it's not a scientific opinion. It's just my opinion. Um, I don't know. When you look at the landscape of the profession in the world, there are different kind of options. We can see that in lots of countries, such as Canada, they are going to the university for a micro program, and then they are going to move the initial formation to the university. When you look at United States, there are different kind of doctors, but as far as I'm concerned, I think they do not practice a lot with manual therapy. There are also different kind of options, such as in Australia, New Zealand, that they go to university. In UK, the different kind of options, but there are in university too. In Switzerland, in Belgium, in France, it's increasing, but it's still not as good as if it was in university. And in the other country, it's not. There is not sometimes even legal recognition. And in South America, I'm not sure that I'm quite aware of what is happening exactly in different kind of countries, but I can understand that there are more and more osteopaths trained in different kind of schools. There are federations, but I'm not sure about the legal status now. So I can see a kind of movement of universitarization of the profession, increasing the institutionalization of the profession. We have now the Osteopathic International Alliance, which is talking to the World Health Organizations. And we see that there are more and more evidences. We are going to publish a paper in a Switzerland, a Swiss journal called Main Libre, and we identify that there are more and more publications as the time is going on, and the education is increasing. There are more and more PhDs and master degrees in osteopathy, so we have more and more researchers in this field, and we make very strong publication in medical journals such as British medical journals with new methodologies for the non pharmacological interventions, so as to make strong clinical trials, for example. So things are moving, the scientificity is increasing, and I don't know what is going to happen with the identity of the profession, because other professions are increasing also, such as physiotherapists. They are improving their methods, they are improving their university process, of course. And of course, there are parallels that we can make between those professions that do manual therapy. And of course, identity questions are going to rise again and again. And I think everyone needs to be prepared with strong historical background knowledge so as to make the best choice for the future, so that everyone can find his place and not being in resistance or in struggles with the normal evolution of profession, of course.
How do you feel? We were talking to Luciana Alberto, that it's a Brazilian living in the UK. She's an osteopath there, and she was just telling us that there's this movement to put chiropractic and osteopathy and physical therapy under the same profession. It's to merge those three professions into only one profession. And she said that Oliver Thompson is one of the names that are defending this fusion between professions. How do you feel about that?
I don't know. I don't know. I usually do not do lots of politics on the part of osteopathy. If not, I should engage myself in the political fight, but this is not what I do. I'm more comfortable in the field of science, in the historical epistemology part of the profession and a philosophical issue for osteopathy today. Um, I'm not sure that I have an opinion on this part. What I heard is that they had common classes with those profession, and for now I didn't had the information that they wanted to make an only profession. I only understood that they can share a different kind of classes, so I don't know about that. We can also see that in other countries such as Belgium, osteopathy is taught in university in modern sciences departments. So there are lots of connection between discipline, but it's it's happening also in other disciplines such as medicine, such as other things. So I don't know. I don't know about the future. I don't know what to think about that for now.
You have a rotten crystal ball. Just wrote. There's some problem in your crystal ball. I think I see that. I see that. No
Yeah,
pressure.
I see what you're doing, and the thing is, when I first saw the Mythologie Osteopathique on Instagram, I just talked to Leo, and we see the importance of your work, because it's something that everybody was afraid of talking about. And we only have to thank you for this initiative, this courage to go and say right to our face, hey, stop doing this bullshit. It's time to change. Stop believing in fairy tales. We don't do that. Don't be stupid. And we like to ask you, if all osteopaths in the world could hear you now and you could deliver a message to them, they will listen to you. What will be your message taken from your books, not your book, your books? And what would you say to us that's necessary? What's the
Um,
message?
Maybe the take-home message could be something like, "Don't be afraid," because there is no need to be afraid. Uh, Scientific evolution is not against manual therapy. It's just thinking differently because we have new evidences that shows it makes sense, but this is more rigorous. And when you start to think with phenomenology, for example, or functional MRI, or biochemical markers, systematic review, meta-analysis, clinical trials, it's a very nice universe to discover with lots of evidence that can try to enable people to escape from dissonance, cognitive dissonance, I would say. So it's very, very much more comfortable to deal with knowledge instead of spirituality on that part. So I would say, do not be afraid to face knowledge. It's going to be very helpful in your life.
Não tenha medo do conhecimento. Ele será muito útil na sua vida. Very
Exatamente.
nice. Very nice. Very nice.
And there's any myth that you would like to talk that we didn't mention? Is there any other one that you remember?
No, no, seems to be still it's fine like that, I guess. Yeah. Maybe when the second book is going to be published, it will
Ah,
be the occasion to talk about it.
Second
So,
book.
so you came back and we have another one to talk.
Uh,
All the author already started to work on that part, so I have the list of the myths that are going to be in the second book if you want.
I
The myth
spoiled.
of interprofessional collaboration, so the myth of the isolated exercise of osteopath, the myth of the perfection of the organism, the myth of the ideal posture, The myth of osteopathy is a pseudoscience because osteopathy is not a pseudoscience. It has pseudoscientific claims, but just like they exist in medicine and in lots of other fields, physics, law, lots of discipline have pseudoscientific claim. And the myth of the KISS syndrome, this is maybe mostly a European thing. In the pediatric field, they invented a syndrome, but this is a totally bullshit syndrome. So it was the best occasion to talk about that.
What is the key syndrome?
I don't know exactly. This is something that was described by a medical doctor who is also an osteopath in my memory. And this is not my chapter, but it's something with the position of the skull of the baby with cranial deformations, but it's only a description. This is not very stabilized, and the proposition to treat patients are definitely not um, facing scientific evidences. But it's called KASS, KISS syndrome, if you want to just have a look. And the osteopath that has written this chapter started a PhD on the cranial deformation with pediatrician. They are going to look that with biopsy. They are going to take part of the skull so as to see how is the ossification going on. Is manual therapy efficient? And if yes, which part do we need to press? And what is the pressure that we have to put? And they have very nice evidences. They show it's better to make manual therapy instead of not making manual therapy on the cranial deformation of the baby. So with a neurosurgeon that is working with her, so it's nice. It's nice.
But
We have nice works on plagiocephaly with manual therapy that shows a real improvement of plagiocephaly.
Like a
We
judo,
love
yeah.
the myth of ideal posture. It's a nice one.
I just love that. I just love that. And the health, how to describe that? The perfect health.
Perfection of organism.
The
Yeah,
perfect.
yeah.
Yeah.
That,
We
that,
have the late Philippe Souchat to thank for existing the ideal posture.
your point. Yeah, that's perfect.
If
But
you know
now,
someone who makes the translation of the book, do not hesitate because my editor is searching of translators. So if you know someone who would like to make the translation of the book in Portuguese,
Portuguese?
the door will be open.
We are here to do that.
No,
Just
in Portuguese it's us.
put contact.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Just keep in touch that we work on that, and then
Yeah.
okay, nice.
we bring you to Brazil to autograph the book here. That
Yeah.
With you guys, because if you do the translation, your name will be on the book, so you will have to make autograph too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Careful with the celebrity.
the little one.
We'll charge 100 euros per autograph. So mine, yours, Leo's, it's 300 euros.
Perfect.
We
We're
can
gonna be
have
rich.
we can have a cafe in the room.
Alors, now it's the most important part of this podcast. The big question. The one you cannot be afraid of. You have to stand on your ground and say to us, what is your,
No pressure.
no pressure, what is your preferred pseudoscience? The one you like the most?
Um, it's a quite tricky question because when you do philosophy of science, you're facing with lots of pseudoscientific things. I would say things, not um, kind of medicine. Maybe my favorite could be astrology because it's very, very used in philosophy of science for lots of reasons because it has lots of pseudoscientific claims and it can enable philosophers of science to use the things so as to explain the different propositional knowledge or objectual knowledge that can be problematic in the, scientific reasoning. So maybe I would pick astrology. But I would also say that we need to be very careful to make a difference between
It's just
uh,
because you are
what we call
Sagittarius. That's it. That's because you're
Sorry?
Sagittarius. That's it. That's just because you're Sagittarius. That's it. That's why
You're
you.
Sagittarius.
There are very nice humorists in America that make a very nice show that ask the people to determine their sign, astrological sign, and someone is saying something, and he say, "Yeah, but no, I'm another sign," and someone else is saying, "Ah, I was sure about that," and he say, how can you be so proud of yourself? Because I'm not also this other sign that I told you I was. So, as you
Knew it.
can see, it's a very
I
funny
knew it.
thing. I knew it,
Every day,
exactly. I knew
every
it.
day, just reading the patient's horoscope to say to them if they're going to be fine or not. Oh, according to your horoscope, today is not going to be a good day for you.
Not a good
You
day
won't make it.
for recording a podcast. So cancel.
Yeah. Gente,
Exactly.
astrologia é a pseudociência favorita do Pierre-Luc. Então, assim, você que gosta de ler o horóscopo todo dia, fica ligado, hein?
Do you have in France here in Brazil we have the paper, the news, the newspaper. We have the horoscope in the newspaper. In France
Yeah.
you have
Every day.
also?
I know that when I was a child and a teenager and young adult, there was also that kind of thing in newspaper,
Yeah.
and it was funny because it's always working. It's what we called a bias of uh, Forer. It means that when you take people and you are claiming to enable them to do a test, a psychological test, and then you summarize the test, and it's something like astrology, and they read and they say, oh, yes, that's exactly me. But then you reveal them that it was just a machine that produced sentences with randomized sentences. So if you want to believe something, it's very easy to have lots of confirmation in your life, and if the astrologic test said that you're going to meet someone that will be very nice for you, if you receive a message from a friend, it's working. If you do not receive any message, you can think about someone. It's always working. When you want
Yeah.
things to work, it's always working, of course.
It's something like a meeting a gypsy that read cards, and they all say, "Oh, I see a man in your life."
Or what is very nicely working is the problem with the parents. Oh, I can see you have a problem with your mother. No, I have no problem with my mother. Oh, it means that you have a problem and you don't want to admit it. It's always working. It's always working.
It's on your left knee. I know you have this problem on your left knee because you have an unsolved problem with your father.
Yeah, true.
Always gonna work. Always gonna work.
Yeah, but that's very dangerous at the same times because we have this very nice organism in France that we call Mivilude. It's a state organization that has to focus about sectarian problem issues. And if you say to someone that he has a problem with his birth or his mother, you can create even problems that were not existing at the beginning. And then you have troubles where the person was maybe healthy at the beginning. So even if it's funny for us because we know that we are quite aware of those absurdities sometimes, it could be a medical a real problem with the interpretation or the excessive psychologization of the patients sometimes. And I've seen that a couple of times in osteopathy when a patient is coming and the osteopath is finding something on the bones, and he say, "Oh, I think you have a historical problem." Well, it's creating problems that were not here before. So that's a very difficult issue to face in osteopathic education, of
You
course.
say that we suffer from this Don Quixote syndrome. We're fighting windmills. Do you know Don Quixote de la Mancha?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we're
We,
fighting windmills. We create our monsters and we have to fight our monsters. That's what we do nowadays in our profession.
But I guess with your podcast, you're acting on another direction so as to improve your fights and improve your results. So it could be seen as a great thing. That's what you guys are nicely doing.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
That's our work, diary work. We we
We,
we just
we
talked
were,
about that Tuesday with our students. So there's a myth. We don't work with that. We have the start the osteopathic diagnosis like this. We used to do that, but we have
we were using,
two kinds of followers:
yeah,
the
followers.
lovers and the haters. That's
Yeah.
that's really really amazing.
We're using your work on methodologies and identity to talk to our students and to show how important it is to strengthen our identity and how it's the importance of running a way of busting off the mythologies, the myths from our profession and to strengthen our position as a health professional, a health provider. And we also were thinking about having a discussion about pseudoscience, how it's so attractive to us. How why do we are so attracted to pseudoscience? And you as a philosopher, and surely we'll be invited to this discussion with David Puder, Zegaha Parodi, Dan, that we see you as great thinkers of our profession, and we are sure that we'll have a great discussion between you three or four in a podcast.
Pleasure.
We are
Pleasure.
We'll have to stay the whole day talking about that. It's like 12 hours of discussion, a round table.
we are working in our Real Madrid osteopath team.
Yeah, it's a great team, right? Léo, um pouquinho de português, para o Pierre falar um pouquinho de português para
Agora
gente.
vamos testar um pouquinho de português. Gente, esse foi o nosso episódio, nosso
Quinto episódio.
quinto episódio da nossa terceira temporada. Tivemos aqui esse momento falando com o Pierre-Luc Lermite. Espero que vocês tenham gostado tanto quanto a gente gostou, porque assim, é muito gostoso falar com gente que entende a nossa linguagem, entende os nossos problemas, consegue olhar para o nosso próprio umbigo e falar do elefante que está na sala. Então, eu acho que esse é um dos objetivos que a gente tem aqui no podcast, é trazer a ciência de forma simples, descomplicada e colocar a ciência na prática do dia a dia de todos vocês. Então, para isso, a gente tem a comunidade Osteopatia Científica, para isso a gente tem o podcast, para a gente traz esses convidados sensacionais e o link do livro dele está aqui embaixo. E não sei se
Isso.
vocês perceberam que durante esse episódio a gente foi convidado para traduzir esse livro para o português. Então, faremos a tradução do livro em português e
A
já
editora
convidamos
é
o Pierre
Matei.
para vir para o Brasil autografar esse livro quando ele for lançado aqui no Brasil. Então, isso tudo foi
O,
combinado ao vivo, porque a gente não tem conversa.
o Luiz falou que já vai comprar o livro, hein? O Pierre tem 5 livros, só lembrando, o Pierre tem 5 livros e todos são sobre saúde e prática profissional, são livros fabulosos, né? É um prazer ter esse cara que é realmente fabulosa e está trabalhando numa questão muito importante que é da identidade profissional. E, Pierre, quelques mots en português por nous?
Sim, eu gosto muito suas podcast. Muito obrigado. Eu não me lembro muito português, desculpe.
Pas de problème, nous pouvons parler français aussi. Pas de problème ici. Nous parlons les langues qui s'appellent ostéopathie. C'est la différence.
Nous
Merci,
parlons portugais. Ça suffit.
merci bien pour votre participation, pour les connaissances que vous avez comparties avec nous. Merci bien, merci bien.
Merci beaucoup.
É isso aí, galera. Mais um episódio pra gente, esse episódio fantástico do Pierre. E a gente continua aqui trabalhando. Lembre-se de clicar aqui embaixo. Quem quiser entrar para nossa comunidade, vale a pena. Vem se atualizar, vem ser um osteopata cientista, vem transformar a sua prática em algo de relevância, construir sua autoridade, ter bons resultados. Sigam também a página do Pierre no Instagram. Pierre, quelle est votre page sur Instagram?
Je la partagerai avec plaisir.
Pierre-Luc, comment ça s'appelle? Pierre-Luc, Lermite,
Arroba Pierre-Luc,
arroba Pierre.
Pierre-Luc Lermite. Not an easy
Pierre-Luc.
one.
A gente vai colocar aqui embaixo nos comentários o do Pierre, mas lá no Instagram a gente já postou e tá marcado lá para vocês seguirem o Pierre também.
Sigam e aproveitem que daqui a pouco tem Mitologias Osteopáticas 2 e ele vai voltar aqui para falar sobre esse livro. Pierre, tu peux faire votre considération? Qu'est-ce que tu voulais dire?
Final words?
Final word, that's okay?
No final word. Instead, thank you again for your invitation, both of you. Merci beaucoup. E muito obrigado.
Valeu, Léo. Valeu, Pierre.
Abraço, galera.
Até a próxima.